Apologies from Councillor Bissett and Councillor Flynn.
Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. The first item is the minute of the meeting held on 12th of March. Firstly, is that an accurate minute? Any particular matters that aren't covered in the agenda that anybody would wish to question or raise? Okay, thank you. Next item is the rolling action log. Any item that requires further clarification?
Convener, first of all, can I apologise for not bringing this to you beforehand, but one of my members has given me a couple of questions they would like me to raise. First one is in connection with ID 459 scrutiny, fly tipping. He's asking, can there be a report at the next executive meeting to see if there was an increase in fly tipping since the 2-day closure at Roughmute and Kinneil? That's the first question. Do you want me to do them one at a time? There are 3.
Okay. I don't see any difficulty with bringing a report, but I'm not sure that the changes would have been in long enough to be able to determine the impact.
I think that's a good point you make yourself, Convener, but perhaps maybe later on in the year it could be something.
After 6 months?
I think we had agreed the 6 months.
Right, that's fine. Yourself. That's good, Paul. Thank you. Thank you. The next one was in connection with ID 463, the new headquarters. When is the Town Centre Working Group, and could an update be provided on this to make all councillors aware of the developments, not just those on the executive?
Mrs Geisler, I think it's in the beginning of May is the meeting.
Is it before or after the full council on the 8th of May?
Rona, could you maybe use your mic so that the recording's picked up?
There's no need to be too specific. I think they're just looking for an undertaking because they're not on the executive. If it would come back to the full council, then they would have an opportunity to say what they want to say.
I think there was a report at the last executive, excuse me, that detailed a timescale for the work that was happening, and until we get the feedback around the town centre's membership of the smaller group, I can't remember what we're calling it, Rona, the forum, and then it's difficult to have anything to report to members at this stage.
Right.
But we would certainly happily, once there is more detail, do a briefing for all members.
Good. And a report at the full future full council so they can say their piece.
That would be something we would need to look at through the governance structure to where it's most appropriate that the report goes.
The governance structure obviously involves the Council of the Future Board in considering there will be the meeting of the working group, the Town Centre working group in May. There will be a report back in June, and everything about the HQ is going, and the Art Centre is going through the Council of the Future governance arrangements as well. It's not intended that anything will come back to full council until we're further along in the process. But we can certainly provide any briefing material to any members with that process, right, that governance process, if that would be helpful.
Just as long as, and I think Rona's saying that when there is something substantive, it will be at the full council, so that
once there's a decision
members,
to be made, then there will be a decision. It will go to the most appropriate body for that particular decision, and something that is substantial as our council headquarters is very much likely to have to be approved by council.
That's fine. Thank you.
It could be. I know it's soon anyway, and that will allow that next piece of work to move on. But as I say, if members require a briefing more than where we are at this moment in time, then we're happy to do that. But I don't think there's much more to be able to update from the last briefing. Got a motion that was referred to the executive, and it's the papers before us. I don't know, is Councillor Black here to? No.
No, I understand Councillor Black's not able to attend this morning. There's a meeting of the Health Board, and Councillor Black is the Council's appointed representative on the Health Board. But as I understand it, she's content that the motion be dealt with in her absence.
Yep. Okay. Right, Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, as has been discussed, Alison's got a Health Board meeting this morning, so apologies. She had hoped to speak to her motion. So I'm just going to read out Alison's statement on her behalf. First of all, our hope is that the motion is straightforward and that it will get unanimous support of the Executive. Funeral poverty has been a subject that has been discussed in various arenas, including the Scottish Anti-Poverty Forum. With welfare reforms, less security in work, lower pay and higher energy costs, etc., more people are finding that they don't have the means to pay for the funeral of a loved one. Last year, Councillor Black was asked to join the bereavement steering group led by Sandra Campbell, who is the local health lead on palliative care. During the December meeting, a group member who worked for the bereavement services at Stirling Council told the group about a friend of his. This friend, who had lost his mum the previous year and the whole family had struggled to pay for the funeral, a few months later, when his dad died, there was no way that the family could afford the expense. Sadly, this meant that the state had to pay and the family were unable to say goodbye to their loved ones as there wasn't a service, etc. He told how his friend had been broken-hearted and how upset he had been, and this led to a report going to Stirling Council whereby the local authority, in conjunction with local undertakers, undertook to do an adapted funeral, where the cemeteries team performed some of the usual roles undertaken by undertakers at the graveside, and the family could then say their goodbyes. Councillor Black has asked for a report for this from Stirling Council, however this hasn't happened, so please apologies for any gaps in this statement. This definitely is worth looking at in Falkirk Council in more depth. Our bereavement services team have been doing excellent work in the recent years, and with our own staff working hard to ensure that we do deliver a personalised service even in extreme circumstances. However, with universal credit and other welfare reforms, it's not easy for individuals and families to get credit or to pay for funeral with a card. As a council, we have a good relationship with the funeral sector, and it would be a worthwhile exercise to engage with the funeral sector to see where the council and undertakers could work together to minimise the trauma that being unable to pay for your loved one's funeral can bring. So again, reiterating the hope that the Executive will come together on this and unite behind the motion. And this is the motion. Funeral poverty is on the rise, with more families struggling to pay for their loved one's funeral. Nationally, increasing numbers of people are having a nationally assisted funeral, I think it's called. Is that the proper terminology for? National assistance, which councils have a duty to organise. Excuse me. Stirling Council have recently made changes to their bereavement services plan, whereby they now offer a reduced burial, which offers the relatives a chance to say goodbye. This was done in collaboration with local undertakers who were willing to support this. Council recognises that funeral poverty is on the increase. Council will actively seek opportunities to offer a funeral service that enables grieving relatives a chance to say goodbye whilst keeping costs to a minimum. Council will engage with the local bereavement sector to see where collaborative working can take place to support families who are struggling to afford their loved ones' funeral costs. And finally, Council asks the Director of Development Services to bring forward a report to an executive meeting within 3 months. Thanks.
That motion, because the wording is actually slightly different from what's actually on the paper.
Okay. Alison was trying to put it together yesterday, and I just got this late last night.
Yeah.
I can certainly go and ask that.
I think the thrust of it is very much the same, but the wording is different from what's in the paper. Yeah.
Or,
Well-
or alternatively, it may be that Councillor Coombs, you're simply content to rest on what's in the agenda.
Yeah.
What's in the front of the agenda? Yes, indeed they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, as I say, the general thrust is the same. It's just that the wording is slightly different, just to make members aware of that, just so that they know when we come to the discussion. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Gardner. Oh, sorry. Okay, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm sure we all agree here funeral poverty is an issue and support this motion to a certain extent. However, I feel the Council and bereavement services have done a sterling work so far, and the emergence of the National Funeral Expense Scheme should be considered alongside any report brought back to the Executive. What can't be ignored is Falkirk's funeral interment costs are among some of the lowest in Scotland. If we compare against the Council mentioned in this motion, they currently charge sterling, that is, £1,107, in comparison to our £607, a difference of £500. That's a considerable difference. Stirling Council and East Ayrshire currently only have burial facilities and do not have cremation facilities. We have only recently offered direct cremations, which offer a significant reduction in cremation costs and, as such, helps assist funeral poverty. This choice has been taken up 74 times in its first year, compared to 72 in 9 years for the national assisted funerals. So, in conclusion, I'm happy to support the bringing back of the report asked for in the motion, but would respectfully request this to be longer than the 3 months requested. Any new models or changes to Falkirk Council bereavement services practice would need to be worked up, possibly with the need for a short-term working group, with a remit for funeral poverty and potentially involve changes to work practices, staffing levels and external contracts with funeral directors. This would involve significant officer time to scope out. The role and effect on staff and existing priorities cannot be underestimated and would mean changing priorities. It is therefore respectfully requested that in the interim, the best targeted assistance to those who most need assistance with funeral poverty is achieved through our existing service changes and the emerging Scottish Government funeral expenses. So the amendment I've got here only basically changes the last part, so I've not printed them all out because I'm trying to save trees. Council asks the Director of Development Services to bring forward a report to an executive meeting once the new FEA, Funeral Expense Assistance Scheme, has been implemented and established.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gardner. Do you have a second for the amendment? Okay. Okay, colleagues, open up to comment or debate.
Sorry, could I just ask, Paul, you've said, so the final final line would be once the FEA has been initiated, implemented. Is there any idea of the timeline for that?
Certainly after the summer recess.
But within the next 6 months?
Yeah, I could ask. Possibly within the next 6 months. Round about that anyway.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to accept that. I'm sure Alison would be. As long as we are still talking in a reasonable time frame, we're going from 3 months to 6 months.
I think it was just, it would seem prudent to wait until the outcome of the FEA in order to develop whatever scheme we take forward, because we could end up having to go back and redo the work that's already been done. And that wouldn't be good for the public to start to change the goalposts. So I would anticipate that certainly before the end of the year we will be able to have a scheme in place.
Okay, I'm happy to accept that.
Okay. Councillor Nicholl?
I think everyone round this table generally agrees both with the thoughts behind Alison's motion, but I do think that Paul's suggestion is very reasonable, and I'm happy that Joan is accepting that, because it seems to be perhaps the neater way to get to what we all want to see.
Okay.
Just a second, I'll formally accept the slight amendment. I would only make one point, though. The cost of a funeral is not simply what we charge, but what the undertakers charge. And sometimes, some of them, it's like buying a car.
Indeed, and anyone that has had to, in the recent times, look to fund a funeral can know exactly how challenging that is, and that the bulk of the costs do tend to be with the funeral directors. Therefore, we have been looking at the arrangements and the collaboration that other councils have had with the funeral directors in their area about how we can drive down the costs. So that's not lost, and hopefully we can get something similar.
So I do think we've reached a reasonable compromise there.
Yeah. Councillor Alexander?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said around the table, and obviously the funeral undertakers' costs are something that we can't control. We can control though is our own costs, and I think Paul has to be credited with the changing the emphasis on the charges. The last 2 years, the average increase has been 4.8%. In terms of our own costs, 2 years prior to Paul taking on that particular remit was 10.9% and 15.6%. So we have to recognise that we have a role to play, and I'm pleased that Councillor Gardner has taken that on board and acted accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Mrs Geisler?
Thank you. Just to advise members that we were advised yesterday that the Competition and Markets Authority are intending to do some work in relation to funeral directors and crematoria services. And that local authorities have been asked to contribute to that by the 9th of May. So we'll take an opportunity to input some of the discussion that's going on today. But I think this is also a helpful contribution to the work that we're doing, that if the funeral directors and those who use crematoria are being looked at by the Competition and Markets Authority anyway, with any luck they'll have reported back in the timescale that we're looking for, and we'll be able to integrate that into the work that's been authorised today.
That's helpful to take cognizance of the national picture as well.
Yep.
Okay, members content? Okay, thank you. Participatory budgeting. Stuart had an early warning. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Convener. This report sets out for members' consideration a framework of proposals on the development and implementation of participatory budgeting within the Council, and members will be aware that this is a report that's appeared on the Raleigh Action Log for some time, and a difficulty in recruiting staff has delayed the report coming to members. The report sets out a set of principles on how we might move forward with regard to participatory budgeting, with further work to be undertaken between now and June, with a report back to the Executive in June on the detail of how we would take forward participatory budgeting within the Council. Members will be aware from previous discussions on this matter that the Scottish Government and COSLA have agreed that at least 1% of local authority budgets should be subject to PB by the end of 2021. So that's actually pretty close when you look at what our budget cycles are. Recent COSLA reports suggested that approximately 6% of local authority budgets could be subject to PB. Reverting back to the 1% threshold, 1% of our budgets would be somewhere in the region of about £2.9 million that would be subject to participatory budgeting by the end of 2021. And the move to PB actually sits very well with our transformation theme of enabled and empowering communities. Section 4 of the report sets out the proposed framework that we're asking members to consider, and there are 3 elements on how we think we can take the principle of PB forward. The first is around a grant-funded approach, the second around place-based funding, and the third is around a mainstreaming approach, and that links well with the work that we're doing on locality planning. The rest of section 4 then goes into a bit more detail in relation to each of these three different approaches. So starting firstly with the grant-funded approach, members might recall that we received funding from the Scottish Government through the Community Choices Fund back in 2016. We ran a number of sessions in 2017 in Grangemouth, Bowness and Maddiston, and these were all considered to be very successful. In section 4.3 of the report just provides members with some of the outputs from these three exercises that were undertaken back in 2017. And the principle here is that we ask communities to get involved in developing projects, and there's bids put forward with votes amongst the communities as to what they consider to be the most desirable projects to receive funding. Looking at the amount of funding that might be available for this particular theme, section 4.6, 4.7, 4.8 looks at some of the possible areas that we might look to. So we've got just over £100,000 in budgets for gala days, Bowness Fair and community grants, together with some funding that we could draw from Common Good Funds, Health and Social Care small grants, digital inclusion small grants. So we wouldn't be suggesting that we use all of the money from these areas, but these are areas that we might look to draw funding from. Section 4.9 of the report then just sets out bullet point form how we go about allocating the money, and that's consistent with the summary of how we allocated funding in the sessions in 2017. Second approach is one of a place-based approach, and again we refer to some experience that the Council has in that, in housing services, in terms of the influence that parent councils have in the allocation of pupil equity funding and work that's been done in development services in relation to the Helix. We make reference to some examples of good practice of place-based funding in North Ayrshire, East Ayrshire, Dundee and Fife Council. So we've got some good examples that we can draw on of where we know something has worked well. And this is about delegating budgets to our communities for them to take decisions on the allocation of resources based on priorities. The third element is one of transformation by design, and again this is consistent with what we've spoken about in relation to our business plan, and that's about putting our citizens at the heart of how we deliver our services and delivering services in a manner that is desired by our customers rather than preferred by the Council. So this involves getting customers involved in how we actually deliver our services and how our services are designed. And in section 6.6 of the report we set out our approach to do that, which is to do an advanced survey of residents within the area to find out who would be involved in, who would be interested in being involved in PB, and take that to the next level in terms of trying to identify some community representatives to work with us in taking participatory budgeting forward. Section 5 of the report picks up on the Wigan deal, and members of the Council of the Future Board and reference has been made in previous reports to the Executive on work that we've been doing with Wigan to try and understand a bit more about the transformation that Wigan Council have been able to achieve. So we give some details in section 5.1 of the report in relation to the Wigan deal, the pledges which have been made by the Council and the pledges which have been made by the community. And the suggestion is that as we go forward with our PB approach and the empowering and enabling communities, that we look to try and develop a similar community deal for the Falkirk Council area. So, subject to the agreement of members today, the Local Government's Review Policy Development Panel will be asked to go away and consider a number of areas. These are set out in 6.11 of the report in the 3 bullet points at the bottom of that page. They are consistent with the recommendations that are set out in section 2 of the report. I'm happy to answer any questions that members have.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. There's a lot of information in this report, and it's not something that is straightforward, but neither is local government finance. But this gives an opportunity for our citizens to have more influence over how the council spends its resources, and it allows them to be able to have some direct influence within their local communities. 2021 isn't that far away, and developing a scheme like this and promoting it to our communities and engaging with them to be part of this process will take time and a bit of work to do that. So that's one area to which we want to look at, how we actually go out and do that engagement. 3 strands to it. One's devolving funds directly to communities to be able to direct and fund projects for themselves around the grants approach. The other aspect is directing the council on how it sees the money should be spent in particular areas, and what the community's priorities are for the council. And the final area is the transformation and redesign area, is where service users actually say what's most important to them, and services are designed around being able to deliver that for them, rather than redesigning services and doing unto our citizens. So it's very much turning things a bit on its head, and that's something that is going to be a bit of a culture change, I think, for everybody, but it's one that hopefully will get better outcomes for our communities, and they will feel empowered in doing so. So what we've been asked to do today is agree the general thrust and ask the Local Governance Review Policy Development Panel to go and work up how they would see this delivered, and that would obviously be brought back to members in due course for members to agree. So I'm happy to move the report. Councillor Bowes.
In seconding the report, I think I say that I've been at a number of meetings now with regards to participatory budgeting, and I will say that only once. It will be PB from now on. And it's good in reading the report that we're looking at and listening to. The Wigan deal seems to be the gold standard. We were even at East Ayrshire last week, and they spoke about another council in, I think it was North West England, and I asked how did they get on. They said, well, they actually went to the Wigan deal, and they worked theirs through the Wigan deal. We're also looking at experiences as what's happening in Scotland, so it's positive that we're doing that and making sure we're doing the best thing to try and get this right. And obviously I know that this is just the framework and that the details still to come. With that, I happily second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any members? Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you, Convener. I think, like most members around the table, I'm generally supportive of this. Just one concern, well, I've got more than one concern, but the one concern I want to flag up today is how are we going to get the communities to buy into this and to participate? Because we all know that in every community there are small groups of people who, could possibly hog the whole procedure, and people out with that group get fed up and don't contribute. And it's just, getting to a wide range of people. I see mention of 700 here, but then I hear that an event in Bo'ness before this came to fruition, the one with 3 turned up. So it's just getting a sufficient number of people so that it reflects other than a small clique.
There's a number of examples that we can draw in from other local authorities, and one being one that Councillor Bowes referred to when we had the visit to East Ayrshire. They invested in resources and did in particular areas which would be seen as clusters or localities, 100% surveys, and they actually had people that went out knocking doors and got views of the community between 40 and 60% return on those, and that was how they developed their sort of real locality planning and community engagement, because what they did is they identified people that said, I want to be part of that. I want to be able to do something for my community. But I think there's a number of examples from other councils, and I think that would be part of the work that would need to be done about how we engage with communities and how do we bring people on board to be part of that in order to have the projects that are designed by them at the end of the day based on what their communities or what they feel their communities need most. In order to be able to give them the opportunity to do that, whether that be by directing the council or by direct spend themselves through the participatory budgeting devolved process. Councillor Reid?
Yes, I attended the PB meeting in Bowness. There were several hundred.
Yeah,
in fact,
indeed.
that's it. Yeah. Although it produced the problem which could have been predictable, that if a school item featured, there were more votes for that than anything else. Obviously, a predominance of parents and grandparents voting for it. It's just a question about the role of the Policy Development Panel on Local Government's Review. We're asked that, I say because I'm on that, considering each element in turn and making recommendations. But in 4 it says a report will come including service specific proposals and place-based participatory budgeting. So are we, the panel, being pushed in the direction of place-based PD?
I don't think it's purely restricted to place-based. I think the 3 areas would be the grant-funded approach, place-based, and indeed the transformational redesign. I think all of that would have to be considered. I don't know whether it was if it was being broken down in chunks. I don't know whether Stuart or I think Fiona is there to be able to say why it was specifically referred to place-based.
In terms of the place-based, there's a number of issues that we need to consider. Learning lessons from the previous exercise we did, making sure that when we're allocating funding, that it's something that is going to have a sustainable benefit to the community. I think that was something that we learned the last time. There was a lot of organisations who were seeking funding for projects. I think this time we would be looking potentially at seeking people to come together around a particular issue and getting funding to address that issue rather than funding an organisation. So we would want to discuss that with the panel, how that would work, how we would engage the community in that, and how ultimately that funding would be allocated, whether it would be through a voting process that we had the last time or whether we would do something online. And I think we did a bit of both last time, and we would want to discuss that with the panel. In terms of the service redesign, where I think we're starting to get into more mainstream participatory budgeting, that's very much an initiative that we're working in conjunction with the Scottish Government and the Local Government Digital Office. How we engage people in redesigning our services, and you'll be aware that through the Council of the Future, the digital strategy, and that will be coming to the Executive in May, we're looking at a process of service redesign. So we'll be telling members about that process, telling them about the standards that we'll be applying to that. But that's very much a Scottish approach. So yes, we would be discussing that with the panel, but that would be a different way of engaging people. So it would be 2 slightly different ones, so that's why we would separate them.
Okay. So bearing in mind that's a lot of work to be done, and we're in April, and this panel's got to report back in June. I won't finish that statement. Obviously, it begs the question of how often we meet and when.
And I think that's something that we will need to look at as a programme, because this is one it's not going to be fixed in one meeting. It's going to take a number of discussions in order to get to a scheme that we can present to members.
Knowing the nature of Falkirk, and it has a certain charm, but it can be very parochial. So,
yes.
If Gravesmouth, Old Town, for example, formed a group, would it be a place? If you had a Bonnybridge and a High Bonnybridge and a Allendale, would they all be places, or is that something that the panel is going to come back with?
I think if communities, whatever they define as a community, form an organisation and come forward with something that they see as a need or a deficit, then I think as a local authority we have the obligation to look at what they bring forward with. But I think what the criteria around the funding would have to be outcome based, and that may well help influence. But I think we're maybe starting to get into some of the discussions we need to have in the. Absolutely.
A final point. At the pre-meeting, I asked that members be aware of where the 101,000 small grants spent. I got a commitment from the Chief Executive that would be reported to members, because I'm aware of a group, and it may be an example, who last year got 8,000 and this year has been reduced to 2,000, and members were not aware of that. So I think if that promise could be repeated this morning, not that I'm doubting officers, but
I'll undertake to speak to the Chief Executive and officers about getting that brought forward. Okay. My understanding was there hadn't been much change in the small grants as it came forward to the budget, and hence the reason there wasn't the emphasis on it. But certainly happy to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Coombs, do you want to come in? Your light's still on.
Sorry.
Okay. Any other member, or are we content to approve the report? Okay. Item 7 is the public sector equality duty. And Stuart, you taking?
Yeah, thanks. Convener, members are asked to approve the Council's equality outcomes and mainstreaming report, and to agree to its publications. We're required to report every 2 years on the difference that our approach to mainstreaming is making in our schools, in our communities, and to our workforce. Our biannual reporting means that we need to publish the latest report by the 30th of April this year. Our specific duties are set out in section 3.3 of the report, and these are picked up in detail in the report attached as Appendix 1. I said in my opening remarks that the Council is required to publish its equalities outcome, but the Council wears a number of different hats, and reflecting the various roles that the Council performs, section 4.5 of the report picks up these various different hats that we wear at different times. So sometimes the Council is a community planning partner, sometimes we're a decision maker, sometimes we're a service provider, sometimes we're a procurer of services, we're an education authority, and of course we are an employer. In the appendix, which is the outcome and mainstreaming report, picks up on each of these areas and provides some examples of good practice that we've done in each of these areas, and also some of the statistics that have been involved in measuring our approach to whether mainstreaming has been effective or not in the 3 areas that I spoke about earlier. I won't go through the appendix, which is the mainstreaming report itself. I'm happy to answer any questions that members have on that, and the recommendations, Convener, are set out in section 2.1 of the report.
Thank you, Stuart. I appreciate this is a statutory report and it's a legal obligation that we have to do this. However, there's a couple of things that I think we could maybe incorporate. I don't know whether in this report or maybe I'll go elsewhere. First of all, I think the changes of where we were 2 years ago to where we are now, I don't think it's terribly clear in the report. The movement and the direction of travel that we're going in. I know that we have, for example, the pay gaps noted, and we've got the progression there, but we also don't necessarily have any actions or interventions about what we're doing to address that. There's nothing in any clear detail, a lot of stats about our staff, etc., and the diversity of the council, but not anything about what we're doing to encourage more diversity within the council. And I just wonder, where does that come in? Where does that go? How is that reflected? Yeah, so I appreciate this is a statutory document that we have to do, as all public bodies have to. But there's information and intelligence in here that could be used elsewhere within the developing our workforce as we go forward.
Yeah, that information's picked up in the Equalities Action Plan right at the back of the report, where we've used the table there to give an update on the progress that's been made since the last report in 2016, but also set out what it is that we are planning to do moving forward over the course of the next 2 years.
But where does that go to get monitored? Is there any, within the council that we can see where the movement is going within the 2 years, or whether the strategy is right, or whether we need to change what we're doing?
Corporate management team will monitor that. Can't think off the top of my head where that goes to as far as elected members are concerned, but maybe it's something that might go to scrutiny panel.
Well, I did wonder, because it might have gone to JCC in the past.
Possibly, yeah, possibly. So maybe we could go down the route of the partnership. Yeah, partnership forum.
Okay, with the commitment to look at that and to look at maybe making the clarity of the changes for the future, I'm happy to move the report. Colleagues?
Yeah, just a couple of questions to be some is just a matter of interest or curiosity, shall we say. If Falkirk performance of girls at school exceeds that of the boys, which is not unusual, but unusually the gap is smaller in Falkirk. Now, there's two possibilities there. I won't go into them, but is there a particular reason for that?
Robert?
I could only speculate. I don't have any hard data that would explain why that is the case.
So I say there are two possibilities, but
okay, we'll leave the speculation.
Yeah. The other question, education, is the areas for improvement. I think they go without saying, but looked after children appears again. I know there's a lot of work going on, but taking you, there is no point. What's the measurement and what actions are being taken?
Robert?
I mean, as Councillor says, that is an area that we are continually working on and focusing on, and I think in recent years there has been a bit of a change in a positive direction, but it's something that we will continue to focus on and try and make further progress.
Okay. Page 49. Again, it's about gender. And it's a kind of mixed message. In the lower grades, women represent 73%, but in the top there's 56% of the top 2% and 62% of the top 5%. So it's a kind of mixed message that's coming across here.
Yeah, statistics can be manipulated.
And of course, if you come to teachers,
yeah.
There's a marked improvement as far as the women are concerned. And finally, in LGBT, I think the non-disclosure rate has reduced quite a bit is a heartening sign. And again, I think this committee should encourage employees when they fill in the form to be honest about that, to be straightforward, not to fear anything. Yeah.
And indeed, in fact, you should feel that particularly the council is a safe employer in that respect, and it also helps to develop our diversity within the local authority. Okay, Councillor Gardner.
Just to say I'm happy to sign the report.
All right, thank you. Okay, any other member? Are we happy to approve the report? Okay, item 8 is the development plan scheme. Mrs Geisler?
That's mine, thank you very much. Yes, this is a report that we require to bring to members once a year in terms of the 1997 Act, which is described in the report. And it's the development plan scheme, which doesn't have any of the development plan elements itself, but does outline what the development plan is supposed to do and our progress in implementing the existing one and our progress in developing our new one, which is LDP2. LDP1 was adopted in 2015 and we require to have LDP2 in place within 5 years of that date. The scheme is primarily to make sure that we are keeping to track in terms of that timetable, and also to make sure that Scottish Government can monitor the fact that we're doing so. And important, the various elements of the report is contained in paragraph 4 of the scheme. Sorry, is contained in paragraph 4 of the report, and particularly the participation statement, which is obviously a very important aspect of developing our plan for the 5 years following 2020. That's section 7 of the scheme itself. Section 5 describes the timetable for preparing and implementing LDP2. We're at the stage now where the plan was approved by members. The consultation period has closed in November last year, and we'll be bringing back a report to members in June with recommendations for the final shape of the plan moving forward. If there are no modifications made by members that require to be further advertised, then that plan will be referred to ministers in July of this year, and then there will be the examination following on thereafter, with an expected adoption date of July 2020. Consultation, as I said, is a key element of this in preparing the plan, and obviously the examination will be a significant amount of engagement with those who have an interest in it at that stage as well, so the consultation continues. The recommendation, convener, is contained in paragraph 2, and it's that member approves the scheme for 2019. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs Geisler. Councillor Alexander?
Yes, Convener, as Mrs Geisler has explained, this is a straightforward report, a progress report with regards to the process that we have to go through by statute. We certainly welcome the opportunity to do that. Each stage that we move through with SDP, with the second development plan, SDP2, the stronger that gets in terms of planning, the more up to date it is, reflects on the decisions that are taken at planning, and as we've said throughout, this is the planner's Bible. So it's important that we get through the stages as quickly as possible with the plan that has been before members and approved accordingly. That gives us the opportunity then to deal with applications which are based on perhaps the weaknesses at the moment of SDP1. in relation particularly to land availability. So it's important that we address that, and it's important that we move this on as quickly as possible. So with that, I formally move.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions? Are we happy to agree? Okay, item 9 is the Forest Estates Plan. Mrs Geisler again.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, members will recall that funding was provided for development services to prepare a forest plan which would sit below our long-term 40-year forestry and woodland strategy. And so this report describes the work that's been undertaken to achieve that outcome. Colleagues within Development Services have been working closely with Central Scotland Green Network Trust, given their expertise in such matters, to prepare the plan, and the framework to achieve good outcomes it's been decided that the woodlands in and around town framework would be the best one to pursue to deliver best outcomes for the maximum number of local people. It would also helpfully attract specific funding streams, and so we've decided to frame our forest estate plan by means of 6 urban woodland plans, and those are referred to in Table 1 on the report under paragraph 3.5. Paragraph 3.5 also describes the basis for qualification for inclusion in a WIAT project. So each of the urban woodland management plans, which collectively will comprise our forest estate strategy, will cover a period of 10 years. So obviously they will be refreshed throughout the period of the main strategy, and they will comprise the elements described in paragraph 3.6. They will also have a vision and objectives, which are described in paragraph in table 2 of the report. There's been a significant amount of consultation in relation to preparation of these plans, as you would expect, in association with CSGNT and their various connections. That has very much framed the plans that you see before you today. Each plan will include a programme of works. The programme of works in each of the 6 projects will be significant, and the key outputs that are expected during that 10-year period are shown in Table 3 of the report. The overall outcome is an expectation of the planting of nearly 40,000 new trees throughout the 6 areas. An estimate of potential funding, external funding in relation to the programme is described in paragraph 5.4 of the report. There are 2 main funding streams that we're hoping to tap into, and you can see the potential for these is quite significant. Unfortunately, the WIG, the Woodland Improvement Grant Scheme, is linked very much to funding that currently comes from Europe. Obviously, there is an expectation that will change in some form or another, and therefore the commitment can only be given to us in respect of funding for 2021, but we have an expectation that will be replaced with something else, so that shouldn't stop us from moving on, pressing on with the projects. The funding obviously is limited even for 2021, so we've decided the best way to apply this is to prioritise the projects, and the prioritisation criteria described in 5.7 with the outcome of the exercise in the table in 5.8, table 5. Our next steps will be to, if members are happy with the proposal, will be to submit the 6 plans comprising our Forest Estate Plan to the Forestry Commission for Scotland, and we need to, they need to approve that project before we can move on with this, and obviously that will be linked to the eligibility for funding as well. I think it's important, though, that there will be extensive works undertaken in all of these areas at the appropriate time, and I think it's important that local members are aware when we are moving into these areas to do works, because local communities can become quite vexed if they see lots of trees coming down without understanding the context. So prior to any works commencing, we'll be making sure that local members are aware of it, and that we'll also advertise in their usual social media outlets and the Council's website, etc. As we say at paragraph 6.2, we're not sure what the cost of implementing the full works in Falkirk North, but we are already endeavouring to attract additional funding, particularly from Sustrans. We obviously have a very good relationship with Sustrans, and so we're hoping to be able to partner with them again to improve the footpaths as part of this overall project. The implications are contained in section 7 of the report, that we are eligible for funding for 1920 to do some preparatory work, so we'll be happy to apply for and take that funding if we're successful. And the recommendations, convener, are contained in paragraph 2, and they reflect the elements of the report I've outlined to you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, convener. Loads of thanks. Thank you, Rona, for bringing this forward. I'd like to especially thank Danny, and it's been excellent work from a committed officer and team on this one, and it's good to see some of the team coming through the door in perfect timing there. That was good. This is an exciting report and project in many ways, one which I really welcome. It goes without saying how important a resource woodlands and forests are to the environment, as in reducing the impact of climate change to nature and wildlife, and obviously providing timber and indeed for the public to enjoy. This, if successful, will provide a long-term strategy and funding to improve our council-owned woodland, which we have responsibilities to manage, maintain and improve. The Council's forestry and woodland strategy aims to support the delivery of approximately 850 hectares of new woodland, which is 40,000 trees, as Mrs Geisler mentioned there, over the 40-year lifespan. Some of us might not see its conclusion, but I'm sure our kids will thank us. This plan will allow us to try and bring in additional funding annually from the Forestry Commission for planting, woodland thinning, access and signage. This estate plan is a welcome significant first for Falkirk Council in attempting to access Forestry Commission grant funding on this scale. Appendix 1 highlights the vision and objectives really well. To improve the resilience, amenity and conservation value of woodland areas, in addition to an expansion of woodland cover across grass parkland to improve both aesthetic appeal and habitat connectivity in consultation with local residents. That's a really good bit of that. Moving down the objectives, a bit I picked out as well. Enhance biodiversity through a range of appropriate interventions, including thinning, supplementary planting and invasive species removal. Basically, the Forest Estate Plan is an excellent piece of preparatory work and a prerequisite to allow us to bid competitively and try and access funding from the Scottish Government's Forestry Grant Scheme to sustainably manage and improve our woodlands. I would just like, if, I don't know, Danny, would you like to come forward just for a second, because I'm guessing other people have some questions for you. I've got a couple of wee questions for you. I'm sure you'll have the answers, no problem at all. Do other landowners in Scotland already use this approach to access the funding?
Yes, they do. A lot of the private estates already apply for this funding for their whole estates. But to my knowledge, we're the first local authority in Scotland to have taken this comprehensive strategic approach and produced a suite of urban woodland management plans to cover our entire council ownership. And you know, CSGNT have been very helpful in helping us to innovate and pioneer this approach.
No, well done, excellent. And have we as a council done anything like this before? Obviously it's not going to be, or at this scale?
We have applied for woodland in and around town schemes before. There's been a number carried out by my colleague Ian Edwards over the past 10-15 years. But we haven't previously looked comprehensively at the entirety of council-owned woodlands. It's been on a much smaller scale before.
Excellent. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Vera. I'm happy to move this report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rice.
It's a superb report in reading through this. It's extremely positive and it's an extremely ambitious plan to attempt to obtain this funding from Scottish Government grants, Forestry Grant Scheme. This Forest Estate Plan is significant, and that although the Forestry Commission grant, and as Paul has just covered, has been accessed by many private rural estates, it's the first. It's the first for Falkirk, and more importantly, it's the first in Scotland where a council is making this approach. The attempt, in this attempt to lever in a 1.2 million investment from the grant for over the next 10 years. However, I do understand that it is allocated on a first-come, first-served basis, so any delay on that would mean that there's potential that we won't be able to access that. With that, obviously, and with especially Falkirk North being the first area that's going to be worked in, I'm very happy to second the recommendations in this report.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you. Can I concur with everything that's been said, particularly the remarks about Danny being such a fine officer. In 8.1, a significant amount of woodland across the council area is council owned. The council has responsibilities to manage, maintain and improve this woodland, but has limited resources available to achieve this. This has been a frustration to not only members but to many householders who live adjacent to council-owned woodland in the past. And I'm certainly looking for assurances from Danny that the situation where people have council-owned trees shedding limbs into their garden and being generally overgrown, that this will be a procedure whereby there's some hope that funds will become available to do more for the maintenance of trees, particularly those that are impacting on householders throughout the council area, but as Danny well knows, particularly this week in Pullman Park.
Okay. Danny?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. If I could just draw your attention to Table 3, and in that it sets out the total area of tree safety surveys which are going to be carried out as part of this programme of works. So across the 6 areas there'll be nearly 70 hectares of tree safety surveys carried out, which should help address some of these issues. However, we continue to offer the service to members and citizens of the council area to address issues as they arise, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Alexander?
Just a quick apology. On the previous item I made reference to, it should have been LDP2. I think I said SDP2. It's topical, but not relevant.
Councillor Reid.
I think this is all part of new Falkirk, a new image for Falkirk. It used to mean Falkirk means foundries, now Falkirk means forests, maybe. And we have a lot of them. Just 2 questions. I walk quite a lot in the forests, and one of the problems is, believe it or not, litter. Even in the densest part of the forest, there'll be a crisp packet or somebody's chucked away. Which comes to the main question: who actually owns the woods in some cases? So like Kinneil, Callander, Lionthorn. Who are the owners? How much do we own?
Okay. Danny, I don't know whether you'll know all of that. Or
I don't know all of it, but I know a great deal. Part of the preparatory work for this was to better understand which council-owned woodland, or which woodlands were within our ownership. Now, the area of council-owned, the term is forest inventory. There's 270 hectares of it contained within these plans. But these plans don't cover the woodlands which are managed by Falkirk Community Trust. So in addition to that 270 hectares, we have the wooded parts of Callander Park and the Kinneil Estate woodlands to add, and New Ravenside to add to that. So I guess that might take it to about 350 to 400 hectares of woodland across the council area as council owned.
In the case of Kinneil, it needs a lot of husbandry. There's probably hundreds of trees down in the last 6 months, especially in the fringe, obviously. Are we, the council, responsible for that, or the trust?
There's been a thinning out of the trees at Keneally Estate that's been undertaken over the past 2 to 3 years, and that's been funded by and undertaken at the request of the Forestry Commission. And I think that as the works are nearing completion and they're being more obvious from the road, I think that's why people are noticing it more. So that's the Falkirk Community Trust woodland that Danny mentioned. They oversee that woodland, but the work's been funded and requested by the Forestry Commission. But it will be very much like we talked about earlier, where you have to clear out a lot of trees before you can plant the new ones. And of course, I think that's why it's important when we start our works that there's a very significant engagement exercise with local communities and local members to let everybody know what's going on and why. And so therefore that degree of alarm might not come through.
I think in the case of Keneal, where obviously some have been which have been felled, the others have fallen. The roots are still showing. It's quite a lot. Just one linked question, if I may get permission for this one. I noticed in the Falkirk North plan, which is not the Falkirk North Ward, so there's lots of trees along the river bank. It's always been the aim to have a river Carn walk from the Forth up to Frankerton, Carn Glen. What is the main obstacle to that? Is it land ownership? There are gaps. You can walk quite a bit along the river, but you can't walk the full length.
If only my colleague Angus Duncan were here, he could give you chapter and verse on that. I don't know the reasons. I think the ones you put forward are the most likely ones. If you like, I can clarify that to you after the executive.
As you know, there are thousands of people who undertake long distance walks at the moment. This wouldn't be. You could probably do that in a day, but nonetheless, it'd be another attraction for Falkirk, I think, a river Carn walk.
We'll certainly get that information for you.
Okay, thank you.
It may be again land ownership
but it probably is,
I suspect, because I know that there's, well, for example, within the Falkirk North Ward, the development of Etna Road has opened up part of the canal area so that path can get joined up. So I think there's probably bits like that may well be what the need for negotiation with the landowners in order to be able to open that up. But you're absolutely right that it would be a further attraction to the area. But I have to say that having the opportunity to look at repopulating our woodland area and just the general well-being of the whole Falkirk area as a result of that, people may not necessarily see that, but by encouraging people to get out and about and be part of helping maintain the woodlands as well through various community organisations, to help prevent some of the litter, highlight it as something that's it's worth doing.
How do we deal with that litter where it's so remote? You just have to walk a mile to see it, but it's there for some reason.
I will defer to my colleague and Councillor Garner on that one and some of the work that he's doing.
It's not easy to address that situation. I was up on Damaya just a week past and I came down, my pockets full, so you can't get much more remote than that. The litter that people have left behind. It's difficult when it's private ownership of land and trying to address it. We are not, the council as such with COPLA and all this kind of stuff, we're not responsible for all bits of land. No. We would want to be, but what we're encouraging now is the community groups around the area and looking to, because obviously if they go into their area, if we take Grangemouth for instance, and some of the burns that run down there that aren't council owned land, but they're keen to go in and take the litter out of there. Previously, we would say, well, that's not our land, we're not taking the litter away from you even from there, but we're looking to now address that and make that part of the community litter picks and certainly encourage that as well. So that's one way of addressing it. But
I think what happens, I don't want to dominate the place, but because of litter, the water courses that feed the trees are choked and dried up, and it's quite extensive.
It is, and it's very much a cultural issue as well. And what we need to do is get people to stop dropping litter and dispose of the litter appropriately. And of course, then there's the bigger issue of constantly looking to reduce single-use plastics that end up particularly getting into the water courses. And well, it's no one and it's everyone's responsibility. We all have to do our bit in promoting that even more. And I think, again, that's part of your proposal.
Can I just come in quickly on that one as well? And you touched on the single-use plastics and a little about, and I've mentioned it a few times in here, in the DRS scheme, which should be coming in next year, I think, hopefully, to Scotland. I think that will be a big, big game changer, Pat, in our area. A lot of other countries are doing it, and we were speaking to a couple of people from, I think it was Lithuania and Estonia, and they were astonished at the amount of litter in this country, and the litter that could be put into these DRS schemes, and people can recover money for it or give it to charity or whatever. So yeah, I think that will be a good big game changer, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Just need to wear a jacket with bigger pockets.
Take a
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Something else is topical. What's the colour of jacket you wear?
Okay, are we content to approve the report and wish officers well in the bid and the ambitious plan for 40,000 trees over the next 10 years? Thank you. Okay, item 10 is Zetland Park Grangemouth Master Plan.
Thank you, that's me again. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be, like the previous report, I'm very pleased to be bringing this report to members today, and also to be joined not only by Gary and Richard, obviously, but by Alana Hughes and Jessica Patterson, some of you will know them and others not, but they've obviously been very instrumental in taking forward this work, so I'm very pleased that they were able to come along today. The Council's open space strategy was approved in 2016, and one of the things it identified as being a key open space asset in Grangemouth was Zetland Park. Now, previously in 2015 there had been a master plan completed for the regeneration of the park, which is quite ambitious. However, the project that we're taking forward today isn't quite as extensive as that previous project, because some of the elements of that were not eligible for funding. However, as we say at the end of the report, we haven't forgotten about that, and the elements that remain once this project is complete, we will look to deliver in another way. However, the project that we're talking about today is the Zetland Park Regeneration Project. It was a project for which a Stage 1 funding bid was submitted to what was then known as HLF in December 2017, and obviously we advised members at the time that the outcome of that was a success. So there was funding provided by that organisation to start the project in March of last year, and the elements that that contained are described in paragraph 3.4 of the report. Alana is our project officer, so she's been recruited and has been out and about within the community doing work there. And as a consequence of the work, a consultative draft master plan has been produced, and it's the Appendix 1 to the report. There has been, I think it's fair to say, there's been an enormous amount of consultation in relation to this project. I think the community, it's clearly a very, very important element to the aspect to the community, and they have turned out in droves to take part in the project and tell us what they think about it. We've used the consultation hub, we've had displays, we've put it on the website and other social media outlets. There's been drop-in event-specific meetings, and I think engagement with schools, which is clearly very important as well. And I think one of the very heartening elements is the number of people who have responded through the various consultation mediums to people who have a disability, and they clearly want to be part of designing the park for their use moving on. So there was a significant number of responses received as part of our consultation process, and these are included as part of the report. Following that exercise, there were some changes to the master plan, and these are summarised at paragraph 5.2 of the report and have been included in the draft. In terms of money, we have the costs have gone up. Well, they always do, don't they? But the costs have gone up because I think really the ambition of the project now has grown, and to that extent that's summarised in the table in the report. Table 1 and Table 2 also reflects additional potential for funding to pay for these additional works. There is a funding gap of £187,000 that we've identified, and we're going to keep going back to see if we can get some more funding. We've already had significant contributions from the community themselves and from business and industry in the area, and we will be hoping to raise more through those routes. Obviously, any shortfall in funding, we will just reprioritise the various elements of the plan. But as I say, we don't want to lose the ambition of the plan, either the plan that we have or the one that we might have in the future. We'll be undertaking a piece of work around, along with trying to increase fundraising, also to value engineer the costs of the various aspects to the proposals. And it may be that there are opportunities for the community to be part of that project later on. The works that we have identified will need, some of them will need planning permission and other statutory consents. And if these are coming forward and subject to the bid being submitted, the full bid being submitted to what's now called NLHF later in this year, then the delivery phase of the project should take place between December of this year and September 2021, with the main capital works being in September of next year. Various implications are contained in the report. As you would expect, there will be a risk matrix for the whole project. There are elements of the flood defences, Grangemouth flood defences, that will need to be integrated into the design in terms of the qualities, reflecting the points that Stuart's made earlier. An EPIE has been produced. Obviously, this will impact significantly on people's lives, hopefully for the better. And that the EPIE is supporting that. And finally, in terms of sustainability and environmental impact, as you would expect, this would have a positive environmental effect for the area. So the recommendations, Convener, are contained in paragraph 2 of the report. That's to approve the master plan, to authorise officers to apply for the relevant statutory consents, and to submit the Stage 2 fund to the National Lottery Heritage Fund later this year.
Okay, thank you, Mrs Geiser. Can I ask Councillor Spears, the portfolio holder, and one of the Grangemouth members to come forward?
Thank you, Convener. I would like to concur with the Director regarding Danny and his team. They've done some amazing work. I see Tom Brown's here from Friends of Zetland Park. I'd like to also thank the Grangemouth community and I believe the Rotary Club of Grangemouth, who have been very influential in raising money so we could go forward with this. The Zetland Park, as you know, is one of our oldest parks and much loved parks in the community. But there has been a renaissance in the parks in Grangemouth of recent. Dalgrain Park and Shire Park, Rannoch Park and Zetland Park. And it's great to see, one councillor was speaking earlier about only certain people in the community, but it's been tremendous to see the whole community come together really and back this. The Zetland Park regeneration project has been extensively consulted. And it's been great. I know I've been involved in it right for the start, and it's been absolutely tremendous to see the amount of people that's been involved in the consultation. I think half of them have been at my door raising concerns, but I'm pleased to ask for the approval for this, and if we can push ahead with it, then the sooner the work can start, the better. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. I think it's been a tremendous opportunity to engage with the community and to bring some of that community spirit and ownership to being, and I think it's a good example of community empowerment and going forward. Also demonstrates partnership working with the wide range of funders that have contributed to this project. And I look forward to seeing it developing.
Convener, I would like to second Councillor Spears.
Councillor Spears unfortunately can't move, unfortunately, but I'm happy to move the report and take that. That's great.
Well, can I just say that Zetland Park is particularly valued by the Grangemouth community, as it is the key open space asset for Grangemouth. The Zetland Park Master Plan project is breathtaking in scope. For example, landscaping, fountain restoration, naturalised pond, play area, performance space and rose garden. The implementation of this master plan will have positive environmental effects
Also, this project will inject investment into Grangemouth. Presently, the anticipated delivery phase cost of this iconic project is £2,118,000. As this is an excellent report, packed with information and full of detail, I have much pleasure in seconding the motion and the recommendations as set out in section 2.1 of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you, Convener. Like Councillor Spears, I've received many observations about these proposals, and one in particular which I'm about to come to. But first of all, could I also congratulate the Friends of Zetland Park, Tom in particular, for the work that they've done together with Danny's team in bringing this forward today. 95% or so of which I thoroughly agree with, and agree with every word that Gordon said, apart from two words, and that was performance space. As members will know, this is, and by reading the report, this has been the one thing that has been controversial. I'm delighted that the team has recognised that the first position sought for it was entirely unsuitable, and have moved it to the opposite end of the performance circle. So that's good news. And I'm just wondering, Convener, what evidence there is that this, apart from on obvious events like Children's Day, that there's the demand for this performance circle. I mean, we have a performance area within the town centre in Grangemouth which hasn't been used for possibly 3 years. The last time I saw anybody on it, it was indeed James Trimble of the Falkirk Herald doing one of his gigs. I've never seen anybody since then. I don't think that's a reflection on James's performance, by the way. But I'm just wondering how necessary this is, bearing in mind this is undoubtedly going to be a magnet for antisocial behaviour. And it is a concern that I know a lot of local residents have brought to me, not just those who stay in Abbots Grange Road, but other areas as well. And it just seems to me that proposals which otherwise would have been absolutely perfect, there's this item amongst it that I can just see causing trouble in future years. And I'm just seeking assurance about how vandal-proof this structure will be made, how possible that is. I appreciate the noise and impact on houses in Abbots Grange Road has been mitigated, but I still think it is there. And I'm just got this concern that this great project is being sullied by this thing which I'm just not convinced there's going to be a demand for, other than a few times a year, Children's Day being most obvious.
Okay, I'm happy to. Councillor Spears, have you got some information relating to that?
There has been various areas during the consultation put forward, a great deal of discussion, and I would imagine that the plan we're putting forward in Appendix 3, well, I don't imagine, there has had to be compromises made. Having talked with people involved with the Grangemouth Children's Day, there is a real need for a recognised area, or an area close to the area that they've held the Children's Day for many a year now. Having spoken to and been lettered as well and responded to most of the people in Abbots Grange Road, Drummond Place, Henry Street, they tend to concur with this compromise of the area that we've put it in. Previously we wanted to put it right in the centre area, of which is slightly raised land, and being a Grangemouth boy myself and knowing that where the performance area is at present is very low-lying land and it tends to be rather muddy. And if you've sat there in the gala day with your wet backside, then you can testify to that. But the drainage is going to be improved. There's going to be a lot of work done in the area. The Victorian drains can't cope with the situation at the moment. On the slightly raised bit of land, that is actually formerly a Grangemouth tip, in many 100 years ago or something. They do archaeological digs there. I'm not saying it's scheduled or an area of special interest, but that area has been deemed unsuitable because of the architectural and substructure containment there. Now, on the area where we've moved the performance area, this will just be a slightly raised bit of land. It will be more architectural, sculptural groundwork. Yeah, kids will play in it. That's what a park's for. Yeah, skateboards will use it. That's what a park's for. Yeah, children will be involved. That's what a park's for. We need to realise that there's many generations in Grangemouth and that people from all ages will get great use of this. As for a performance area, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. We don't know if there's going to be bands coming to play or whatever. But I would imagine it will be greater used than it is. But that's what parks are for. And we can't sit there and say that we don't want this and we don't want that and everything else. We've got to try and cater for all tastes.
Okay.
No, I appreciate the efforts of officers to move it, and that is appreciated by residents in Abbots Grange Road. My main concern is how vandal-proof this is going to be, because it is undoubtedly going to attract people. That's a big concern of many Grangemouth residents that have spoken to me. And Robert is saying that it's going to be low level. I anticipated there being a higher stage with some sort of covering. So what is it going to be?
Okay, I'll ask if Danny or any of the team can give a wee bit more by way of detail.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. As Councillor Spears mentioned, the plans for the stage are for it to be kind of a sculptural landform. The raised area will be a maximum of 1 metre in height. We're not proposing any covering for that. So it essentially it will form the place to carry out the crowning of the Queen, and it will give the crowd who will be within the kind of event space in front of it a good view of that. It will be accessible by means of a couple of 1 in 20 gradient ramps either side of them, so that you can get wheelchair access to the stage. And then in front of the stage there will be a series of steps which will allow people to climb to the stage, but will also allow people seating to view perhaps sporting events which might take place within the event space itself. So it's a very kind of low impact landform, and very much intended to read as part of the park. If I can address your concerns on antisocial behaviour, one of the other proposals which is recommended to go into the master plan is to reintroduce a wheeled sports pump track to add to the new play area. I know residents have been very concerned about perhaps skateboarders using the new landform and steps and ramps to ride their skateboards around. But I feel with a purpose-built facility for wheeled sports, for skateboards, almost right next to where the performance space is, that should draw the attention away from it. I mean, of course, we can't rule out that people might want to use the new landform to, jump their bikes off, etc. But again, I think what we've done in the plan will help to mitigate that as far as possible.
Okay.
Just to clarify, that it's not a physical structure; it's a land formation. So it's just going to be a raised bit of land. Is that what you're saying?
I would imagine it will hardly be visible from the road because of the height of the hedge and the surrounding trees.
It has a solid base.
Yes, it will have a solid base, but to the rear of the area, so the non-stepped side of the stage, it would be a grassed earth mounding. Grassy, well, yes.
Okay. Does that give you a better indication?
Well, Danny's just confirmed again what a super officer he is, because he's probably 80% of my concerns.
Today,
the real test will be next week when he comes with me to Pullman Park.
All right, okay.
Good nosedive then.
Okay, are you content with that, Councillor Nicholl?
Yeah, of course I am.
Okay, Councillor Coombs.
Thanks, Convener. I'm not going to make a speech. I wasn't intending to speak on this, but as shadow portfolio holder, I just want to say that yes, it is indeed a great plan, and I think it's been brought to fruition by great officers, not just Danny, but obviously his team. And I did speak to Alana about the plan in detail. I think the performance area has been raised. I think as a resource it will make a great saving for the Grangemouth Children's Day, and even if it is only just for that one thing, as one who walked for many years in the Gala Day and then watched my children sit in the Gala Day, I think that it is an important part of Children's Day. It will be welcomed by the committee and the residents. As a previous Grangemouth councillor, however, I am disappointed to see that the town hall clock wasn't accepted as part of the plan. I see Jessica making faces at me from the back. We did spend quite a lot of time. Residents had contacted me to see about the clock, which is still in storage and would be capable and would make, I think, a huge addition as part of the heritage of the town if it could be included in there. But as I say, for various reasons, even though we had the lovely electronic vision and I'm trying to remember who it was, the Fourth Natural Environmental Inner Forth Landscaping Initiative, when they spent time and money bringing it down to the park, it generated a lot of interest within the town. So as I say, finally, on the back of that, perhaps the gap in funding that we've talked about, and whilst I welcome that businesses have contributed, obviously there is a lot of business in Grangemouth, and perhaps this would be the opportunity to go back to say thanks very much, but please, sir, can we have some more?
And I'm sure the officers will look to take that on board, and the community will set the tone as well, I have no doubt. On that, Councillor Nimmo.
Just quickly, Convener, just in relation to the increased cost as far as the council's concerned, that's going to increase by something like £175,000. Now, I support the report, I think it's a good report, but I'm looking for an assurance that the increase in the council funding will not impact on any other projects and that they won't drop off the list.
Mrs Geisler?
The other funding streams are identified in paragraph 8.1. So there are capital budgets around core parks, around play areas, and also the Grangemouth Flood Prevention Scheme budgets. So these are obviously being used. So that money won't be used on other things, but this is considered to be a priority in those contexts, and therefore there's funding being allocated from these particular sources. They ought not to. There's a prioritisation of these funds, as you know, and this is considered to be a priority. So everything else will be graded accordingly.
I think the shortfall that's talked about, the 187,000, they're looking to still get from external sources. Yeah, that's my understanding. That's right. Okay, are we content to agree the report? Okay. Okay. Now we come to Treasury Management Strategy. Mr Smale.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. This report sets out the Treasury Management Strategy for the current financial year, which we're required to submit to the Executive by the Treasury Management Code, and indeed thereafter submit it on to Council. Section 4 of the report just sets out some economic backcloth, perhaps the most pertinent part is the table at 414 at the bottom of the page. Section 4.2 picks up in what is the main part of the report, the borrowing strategy. The Council's estimated debt position is set out in the table at 423, just over 250 million. No doubt you will have seen the coverage in the recent Falkirk Herald picking up on national statistics and local authority borrowing and looking to, I guess, zero in on what are very, very large figures. The core data is standard stats that are produced across the UK, but the particular warning that came with the stats was more geared to authorities more prevalent down south, who have used borrowing powers to buy investment properties. That's not something this Council does. And I think it's also pertinent to note that, albeit it's a big borrowing figure, a bit like your own mortgage perhaps it's backed by bricks and mortar, schools, council houses, etc. So we're in a strong, robust position. In terms of the borrowing requirement for the current financial year, that's 69 million, and again, how that's derived is set out in the table at 424. Most, and quite often all, our long-term borrowing comes from the Public Works Loan Board, which offers the most attractive terms. There are also, as you'll see in para 429, various sub-elements of that allow us to attract even more favourable interest rates, and we, of course, pursue those as best we can. The other side of the coin from borrowing is the investment side. During the course of the year, from time to time, we carry quite significant balances of cash, maybe at times 30-40 million, and these need to be laid off in the market. And in doing that, our primary concern is to ensure they are going to safe temporary homes, and therefore security of our capital rather than the return we may earn on it is the primary motivator in that activity. And we have a set of detailed credit criteria we use to ensure that we are selecting only the most safest of homes for those temporary cash deposits. At 4.4, we set out the required Treasury indicators, and again, they're there to help provide comfort that the Treasury operation is operating within sound and reasonable parameters. As I say, we're dealing with large sums. In 4.5, we pick up several changes that have been made to both the Prudential Code and the Treasury Management Code, which are our two primary reference points, both of which are underpinned by statute. And one of the requirements is the need to produce a capital strategy, which you may recall we included for the first time in the series of papers presented to members in February as part of the overall budget offering. Another strand that we require to pick up in terms of changes to the regulations is to provide more details on the Loans Fund, and that's set out in section 4.7 of the report. The Loans Fund is something all councils in Scotland are required by statute to operate, and effectively it can be regarded as an internal bank account. We borrow from the market, from the Public Works Loan Board, and that in turn is used to lend on to services to allow them to procure assets, schools, build roads, whatever it may be, and the services as part of their annual budget repay a proportion of that, and we in turn use that to repay the original providers of the loan. Another significant development here reflected in the change to the regulations, which has caused quite a bit of discussion with Scottish Government, Audit Scotland and Directors of Finance section, are changes allowed by these regulations that afford more flexibility in marrying the lifespan of the loan to the debt profile. And we, on the back of that, and other councils have been doing the same, can reprofile the loan or stretch the repayment period, and that affords the potential to harness quite significant revenue savings. So that, along with several other initiatives that are underway, allow us to make a significant contribution from Treasury to help plug the Council's budget gap over the next 4 years after this one, and you'll see evidence of that in the business plan that will be forthcoming to the Executive at its next meeting. I think that's probably the main things, Convener, I want to bring out of the report, and if I can just jump back to the recommendations as set out in section 2. Happy to try and address any questions or comments members may have.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I'm content, following our discussions last week, that we are a very prudent council in respect of our loans, and they are managed very robustly, and they are appropriately used to finance our capital programme related to our services for the benefits of the people of Falkirk. And we are very, very prudent in what we do take out loans for, recognising that there are implications elsewhere. I think the flexibility from government around the ability to, I suppose, refinance our loans in the longer term to take some of the pressure off our revenue budget is helpful. And going forward, as public sector finance does become tighter, and having the ability to be able to do that perhaps helps councils that are very, very pressured, and that's something that we may well have to consider in the future as we go forward. But I thank Brian for this, and I'm content to move the report.
No, formally second and reserve the right to come back in if required.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowes. Any other member? Any questions? Councillor Reid?
Yes, I know there's a European election due and perhaps a general election, but I didn't know there was a Grangemouth Town Council election imminent. Harking back to the last item.
Oh.
However, on to more serious matters. TIF is one of the big items in the capital programme. We get fairly regular reports on that. Could I get an update at some point? It doesn't have to be here, it can be. Oh.
Certainly, that's not a problem.
The second big is, of course, the investment zone application. If, and fingers are crossed, we got money, how would that affect the Treasury management? Would that come in as a loan to us, or would it be a grant?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're touching on there, the nature of the funding coming in determines its Treasury implications. So whether, as it might be grant, and we're hopeful that a significant element of it might be grant, and if there are elements to supplement that require borrowing, then that'll all just feed into the mix. But the Treasury implication is only managing that period between, if it's grant, and indeed the same principle applies for loans, the cash coming in and the outlay going out the door. So the narrower that window between having the cash and spending it, the less implication there is for Treasury. The wider that period stretches to, the more implications, and more so if it's a large number we're talking about.
May I ask about, is it stuck at Westminster again? Or?
We have a visit tomorrow by the Secretary of State for Scotland, who's meeting with members of our Economic Partnership. And from that we'll be looking to determine next steps from the point of view of Westminster, and set out perhaps a timetable in doing that, and from that we hope to be able to make a more public announcement, and then start to update members There's a series of workshops being held. Mrs Geisler, do you want to give a wee bit around that?
Yes, there are 9 projects and as part of our investment zone proposition, which members are aware of, and each of these is being worked up as a sort of mini business case. And as the convener says, there are a number of workshops that are ongoing to develop these further. Scottish Government has already shown significant enthusiasm for the project, and now we're working with Westminster Government. Obviously, they're kind of been distracted with other things recently, but we're really pleased that the Secretary of State's able to come and visit tomorrow and hear more about the project to try and get develop further interest with Westminster. As you'll know, any funding that comes has to be matched by the other government, and our ask is £209 million, so it's a fairly significant ask, but there are elements of the project that are specific to Grangemouth and Grangemouth industry, both to improve opportunities for industry but also to improve the general area of Grangemouth, and therefore that's seen as a national project. So that's the thrust of the business plan. So far it's been received well. We have significant support from Scottish Government, from Scottish Futures Trust as well. Obviously we have a very good relationship with them. So I think we're quietly confident that we've made a good case. I think it's just now a question of whether or not that can be actually delivered. And as Brian has mentioned, on what sort of conditions.
I was going to ask about the workload. So SFT are helping us out in that regard.
We have funding for consultants that are helping us with it, pulling it all together, and SFT are heavily involved, as you would expect. Part of the ask is around town centres, both for Grangemouth and for Falkirk Town Centre, so SFT are heavily involved in that work, and there's a piece of work ongoing that's come through different funding that's ongoing in Grangemouth just now. So all these strands of work we're hoping will come together and allow us to put forward. It's a very strong case that we have, very strong case. And I think one of the things that's been very compelling about it is the degree of partnership support, whether that's from the college, obviously a great asset to our area, and their new building obviously arriving in quite soon. But obviously the business and industry connections that we have, people like Ian Mitchell are on the group, the economic partnership, who makes a very compelling case for the area. So that's something that's impressed both governments, is the fact that the business and industry are very much partners in the projects that we're taking forward, and hopefully we'll be able to guarantee success. We haven't seen that in any other equivalent city deals or investment zones, growth deals.
Excellent work. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Are we content to approve the Treasury Management Strategy? Yeah. Okay. It's item 12, and it's the Town Centre regeneration update. Mrs Geisler.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this report is just a follow-up from previous reports we've brought to members about the Denny Town Centre project. Obviously, town centre regeneration is a key element of a number of our plans, our community plan, our own corporate plan, our economic strategy, and the LDP that we've talked about already today. Phase 1 of the project, there's a wee update in respect to Phase 1. I think it's done its main purpose, achieved its main purpose, which was to transform the town of Denny, and it's proving to be very popular. Phases 2 and 3, members authorised a marketing exercise to be done in respect of these phases, and this report primarily is to advise of the outcome of that process. So Phase 2 was marketed, and as we see in the report, there's no new retail interest being identified, which isn't particularly surprising when you consider the condition of the various high streets up and down the country at the moment. However, we've been in consultation and discussion with colleagues of Mr Riches from his team, and there's a potential for us to work up an offering from the social housing perspective. So further work will be done on that, and the report will be brought back to members once that work is completed. In respect to Phase 3, this is a much smaller site, as you can see from the plan. This was marketed, and we've had one offer, and the recommendation is to accept this offer. As has been pointed out, this is not new business to the area, but it will be moving to better premises and freeing up the vacant premises, which will hopefully be taken up by someone else. So the recommendations in the report, Convener, are to note the progress thus far and the fact that there will be a report comes back in respect of Phase 2 and agree to dispose of the Phase 3 site as described in the report.
Thank you, Mrs Geiser. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Mrs Geiser, for bringing this. Obviously, this is an area that's close to my heart, as they say. In moving this report, or noting this report, I'd like to highlight a couple of the recommendations. In recommendation 1, the progress of Denny Town Centre. I've always been supportive of the new town centre, and indeed have arranged a meeting with retailers tonight at their request to talk about some of the issues we have around the town centre. 2, bringing back a report on mixed usage in the site. I've had fruitful and meaningful discussions on site with Colin Frame, one of the officers, and Symes, the marketing agents, on a few occasions, and indeed with Councillor Harris, who is here today to discuss what mixed use could potentially be on Phase 2. Yes, socially adapted properties is one aspect, alongside, we believe, other options which may include leisure and health facilities. It's paramount that we move forward with that as well. And recommendation 3, agree to the disposal of Phase 3 for the development of a post office. As a local member, I've been heavily involved with the retailers, and given the fact all 4 banks have upped and left Denny, it's imperative we do all we can to keep the post office, which covers some of the needs of local residents. A post office is central to any large town, and for me this is a catalyst to making our town centre a successful regeneration project. I fully support the regeneration of Denny Town Centre, and hopefully members here will be as positive in recommending this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Garner. Councillor Alexander.
Happy to second the report and to reserve the right to come back.
Okay. Anyone else? I'd be happy to approve the report. Okay. Item 13, asset surplus to operational requirements. Mrs Geisler. We're moving to a rate of knots this morning.
This, as members can see from the report, we've been looking at the assets, we're looking at all of our assets as part of the SPR, but also our other assets as well. And this one we've considered there's a potential to declare a part of it at least surplus to operational requirements, which is one of the recommendations. The site is shown, as described in the report and shown on the plan. It's the Kemper Avenue car park, and particularly given its location, that we are confident that there will be interest if a part of it was identified for disposal. It's rarely used car park. You can see from the survey information that there's maximum times there are a small number of vehicles parked there, and the feeling is that it's not a good use of resources. It brings in only about £6,000 a year, and there's far more money than that spent on maintaining and managing the collection of the money. So there is a suggestion in the report, there's a proposal in the report that we will retain approximately 36 car parking spaces, which should more than suffice for the needs as demonstrated. But we are content that should we put this to the market, then we should receive offers which would obviously make a contribution to our capital programme. And that's the recommendation, that we declare it surplus to requirements, and that I'm authorised to market on the open market.
Okay, thank you, Mrs Geisler. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, happy to move the recommendations, Convener. Obviously we have ambitions for the town centre across the party lines within the chamber here, and we need to start cashing in assets in order to pay for those particular plans. This is probably one of the easier decisions that will have to be taken. It's a car park that is not well used at all, and as we see, 19,000 running costs to maintain the car park, £6,000 in income. There's clearly something of an imbalance there. So I've no hesitation in moving the accepted recommendations that this site be declared surplus to requirement. We've kept the part that I think that is relevant to the council's needs, so we continue to have off-street parking in that area for the general public. But it's on a scale now that I think is more appropriate and more realistic.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Are we happy to agree the report?